Hello, this is Will Timpson with CAD Craftsman. This video is a continuation of a previous video for modifying an adaptive connection. This connection, which we previously created and modified, we now want to make it a little more user-friendly. And we'll get rid of all of these extra SolidWorks sketches. Now, we have this plate and all of its information tied to automatically create the number of bolt holes that we need, the number of fasteners follow that, and the gauge for the column and the holes will follow the column size. Now we want to create a component interface to go along with this. If we look at this sketch, we can see items that we might want to have in that interface. The first being the width of the plate, the thickness of the plate, the hole diameter, our bolt spacing, the edge spacing, and the drop to the first bolt hole. Now to start doing those, we're going to look at our file properties. We previously had file properties for the number of bolt holes, the gauge, and we already have the bolt spacing. But we originally had that tied to a dimension. Now we'll put it in the interface. So now I'll put our properties in here that we want to have. And I'm going to go ahead and populate them as I do. As I do these, each of them, I'll add all of them. The width, the thickness. And we'll make the holes bigger. Doing all these a little differently than what they actually are right now so that we'll get to see them change. Oops. Bolt spacing's already there. So now we have the width, the thickness, the hole size, bolt spacing, edge spacing, and bolt drop. Now with all of those, we're actually going to take this bolt spacing and delete the tie to the original dimension. So we have all those file properties. Now we're going to want to create the component interface. And the way we do that is by first taking a blank interface that is provided and copying it into the file location for the connection. So now I have this blank interface. I just keep it on my desktop. Now this interface is triggered by being the same name as the component that it is supposed to operate on. In this case, it's going to be this entire assembly. Now you can create interfaces for solely the plate if you wanted to. But when you insert this connection, you'll have the ability to do the modifications at the time of insertion. So now we have this interface in the connection folder. And I'm just going to copy that file path. so that I now use edit macro, go to the file location, and now I'm going to open this. And the first thing I'm going to do is change the properties and rename it. Now, this project name cannot have any spaces in it, so you just use underscore. So now, we'll go to the user form and view the object. So this blank interface comes in with a label, a text box, and a picture box, the update and exit buttons. We have 6 properties that we're going to work with. So if we take and just click on both of these, hold the control key, and just drag them down, we'll get copies. So now I have 6 text boxes and labels. So we'll start with this text box, come over here to the caption, and change it. And you can move it around and center it up. It has a grid that it will snap to. Now, this text box, to connect itself to the file properties, needs to be named correctly. So it's capital TB underscore and the name of the file property, which we had as lowercase m width. Okay, and we'll go to the next one and do each of those. And then you notice that that doesn't have enough room, so we can drag it around a little bit. And you can do these as pretty as you want them to be. Now, because it's a copy, it just says text box 1 TB underscore to match the file property. Go to the next one, next label, and now the next text box. Type carefully, these have to match exactly. And you'll find out when you test it whether you did it right or not. So I'm just populating each of these. So now that I have all of these labels in, I'm going to click on the form itself and go to its caption and change this to be in-plate connection. And fix this. So now I'll save this, and I'll clear it, and I'll hit run. And you see now that all of these file properties that I actually typed in came through. Now we can just exit this, and right now we'll remove this interface and tie these file properties in. So now I'm going to do the same thing I did before. Double click on the plate. Here, this is the file property for width. And then the file property for thickness. And the bolt spacing. Excuse me, I tied that to the wrong one. That is the bolt drop. And this is the bolt spacing. And this linked variable, which we did before, it does not like linking that. So we'll have to fix that. So now we'll rebuild things and stuff moves around that it has been tied to it. Now I'll actually have to edit this plate and edit the sketch and unlink that value. And unlink the value. That way I can take each of these individually and make them equal to the file property edge spacing. Now rebuild things, and it all moves. So I could go to my file properties and change one of these file properties. So now if the bolt spacing becomes 3, hit OK, rebuild, and you may have to rebuild a couple of times when you do it that way. But it all moves. So now we're going to need to illustrate our interface. So using some SolidWorks macros here, make my drawing sheet white, and I will, under properties, just remove the sheet format so that I've got a nice white sheet. I'll bring in the model view of the connection, do the front view to start with, and you have to do the properties to be able to show the envelopes. And I'll do a projected view here, and likewise show the envelopes. Now sometimes it does this, that you have to realign the origins. So we'll take this one, make it hidden lines, so that we can do some dimensioning. from here to here is my bolt drop. Now, you see this dimension, SOLIDWORKS default, it's kind of a gray color. When you do the illustration, that's not going to show up well. So, I'll make my driven dimensions black. And now, that will show up much better. Now I just want the arrows. So I'm going to delete the actual dimension to get the arrows. So now our properties were for width, which will stick here, thickness, which is here, hole size, bolt spacing, and we'll add a center line here, here. Now we want the edge spacing. And we already have the drop. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now you're going to want to think about how big your interface is going to be. So zoom it to about the level that you want it to show up on the screen. Now I'm going to use a snipping tool and make a new snip. And just grab this as the illustration and save it. So now that I've got that, I'll go back to my assembly, find my interface editor, show the object, and click on this picture. And right now it has a border around it. We look down for the picture and it says none. Find wherever it was you stored the picture and place it in. You may have to pull this around a little bit and scale it to get it where you want it to be. Click on here and send it backwards a few times. And take your labels and text boxes. Now check them that they stay on the front. And place them to match your dimensions. Oops. And of course it hid my text box. Maybe I want to put it over here to get it out of the way a little bit. I'll drag this, make it a little better. All down here. Bolt spacing. Edge spacing. And you may have to do a few different shots once you realize where you want your stuff to be. But for now, we've got all these. And I'll take this picture and remove the border. Take all of these parts and drag them up. And last, take my buttons, the exit and update, and move them up there where I want. Now if I want to make this just a little bit smaller, I'll move that whole size around. And this window is exactly what you're going to see when the interface opens. Save it again and run it. Now I have an interface that I can change whatever I want. And when I hit update, the model is rebuilt according to all these specifications. And I can hit exit and get back out of it. I'll close this interface, rebuild and save my connection. And I'll go back to my assembly. So this is the connection that has the interface now. I'll throw in a quick welded member beam. And this is just the blank beam that has nothing in it. And insert it on this sketch segment. And you'll notice in the welded members it says, gives you the option to run the component interface after the insertion. Well, it'll be the same thing with the connection. So we just completely throw this blank member in here. Now, under SD connections, we'll copy a connection. Copy this one. Insertion point, welded member, bolted 1. And now you see the checkbox for Run Component Interface. You can tick this off. If there's not one, it just ignores it. Click OK. And like before, it'll copy the connection. Only this time, the interface will come up and allow us to make changes immediately. So there's our interface. If there's anything that you want to change, just go ahead and enter those values. Update the connection. And now exit out. So now our connection has been inserted. And if we copy it to the other end, insertion point, welded member, bolted 1. And now since it's what I want it to be, I'll tick off the interface. So usually you just run that the first time. So now we have a very adaptable connection, determines its gauge, its number of bolts, and you can modify the other parameters of the connection as it's inserted. And it appears that it kept the old information. So now I'll click on the plate, choose the assembly, under Tools, choose Component Interface, and here we go. So I'll change this to the information that I wanted it to be. An update. And now our plate matches the one on the other end. So there's an adaptable, intelligent connection.